zoom back about, so maybe pre-COVID. So COVID was a extraordinary circumstance that actually brought about the understanding of just kind of how much we rely outside of the United States. Um, but 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 I'm sure everyone was assessing their supply chain anyways 5 years ago. Um, Over these last 5 or so years, or maybe more, um, are you in fact doing something different supply chain assessment wise than you would have if we didn't have COVID and the BIOSECURE Act wasn't something we were talking about? Are you doing something different?
So, in principle, really no. And I say that because I mentioned this earlier before, and that is there's a set of good supply chain hygiene that I learned more than a decade ago when I was in charge of a lot of the supply chain and the procurement of things for a large pharmaceutical company. And these things go from reducing the reliance on any single country, particularly for essential ingredients or for anything that's short-lived. You need to have regulatory agility, meaning that you have to ensure that there's alternative manufacturing sites that are pre-approved, right? If you want to move to them with alacrity, right? So you have to think about maybe developing regional strategies, exploring manufacturing in India, Latin America, and Middle East as potential contingency plans, knowing that they're not necessarily going to disconnect you from China, and knowing that you have to then do things like bolstering your cybersecurity and IP protections and those types of things, which go hand in hand with working in those particular geographies. So I think. And maybe my colleagues have a couple of others that are on that list of good hygiene, but I think that following those things, by and large, takes care of a lot of the things you're worried about in the BIOSECURE Act, or
Yeah.
when we mentioned earlier, the tariffs, right?
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. And I think it's the one other thing that I'll say about both tariffs and the BIOSECURE Act is that these things don't happen in a vacuum, meaning one country doesn't set a tariff and the other country just lets it happen. So what normally happens is it's a tit for tat, right? Somebody raises a tariff, the other country responds within a couple of days, raising a tariff on the other side. And with respect to the BIOSECURE Act, I don't think that if the United States passed the BIOSECURE Act, I don't think that China or any of the other countries would take it lying down. And that means there could be ramifications that come back from China. There's a number of things that China could do to try to counteract some of that. So
yeah. And there's so Kishore, I'll bring you in just a moment. I want to go back to Reza because it's something that he and I wrote an editorial about, mostly him. But we've now got questions, and all of this, frankly, turns on bolstering the industry in the United States and reshoring and anything, any way you want to look at it, and that means. It should, in the aggregate, mean good news for U.S. CDMOs. And speaking of supply chain hygiene, Reza, I mean, so now now the assignment is to go through and to evaluate all the CDMOs in the U.S. and see which one you can use if you have to replace something you're doing offshore?
Yeah, Lou, I mean, we work with more than 250 CDMOs, CROs, CTLs, and so on, literally on a daily basis. So we have a pretty good understanding of the landscape. And you're right, you and I wrote an article together. And the essence of that article was US and EU CDMOs don't get complacent because of the BIOSECURE Act. Continue to invest in your people, in your technologies, in your infrastructure. And I think that article still resonates with me, and I hope it resonates with you. Yeah. So, yeah. And you have to be very pragmatic, especially if you're a small company. You have to be extremely focused and extremely pragmatic with your supply chain approach. So you cannot get distracted day by day. And you have to look broadly. One thing I would say, I think the tariffs will level the playing field when it comes to pricing. The tariffs will do that. Example, like if you're doing biologics manufacturing in China and US imposes a 10 or 20% tariff, that changes the whole ballgame because of cost of raw material that you have to purchase.